I'm going to turn to our next speaker, who is actually joining us as a function of a pre-recorded video. And I'd like to take this moment just to say how we are so lucky to be able to offer this as an option to some of our speakers today who are not able to join us live. It's the beauty and advantages of doing an online conference. We have Ben Kenward joining us at another time in another space from Oxford Brookes University, and telling us about why even conservative voters want to put the environment at the heart of the post-COVID economic reconstruction in the UK. And so from Ben Kenward, we have a pre-recorded video on this topic. Anybody who has questions for Ben can send these to either us directly, post them on the chat, and I will forward them on to him, or to find his contact details on our speaker page. Take it away, Ben. Actually, don't take it away, because I'm not entirely sure I've clicked on share screen with sound, which would probably not really work very well. Let's try that.
Thanks for coming to listen to this talk, and thanks very much to the organisers of the Social Bridges Conference for inviting me to speak. My name is Ben Kenward. I'm a lecturer at Oxford Brookes University. This work is done in collaboration with Cameron Brick from the University of Amsterdam. I'm also declaring that I'm an activist as well as academic, a member of the Extinction Rebellion. I'm declaring that in part as a declaration of interest, but also because I want to normalise the activist as the academic stroke activist model. I believe it's important that all of us academics recognise the scale of the environmental and climate crisis which threatens our civilizations, and not only thinks about how our own research can be reoriented to deal with that, but also thinks about how we can more actively engage with the general public in order to find ways to collectively solve these problems. And that's why I describe myself as an activist. So the study that I'm going to talk about today is a investigation of public opinion about the environment and how it relates to the economy in the context of COVID-19. And what I'm basically doing today is I'm talking you through the work that's also, you can also read as this preprint online. So the aims of this study were basically to give political actors information as to the political feasibility of following expert advice related to the environment while undertaking COVID-19 related economic restructuring. So what I refer to by expert advice there is the fact that there are a large number of economists now who have pointed out how not only is prioritization of the environment feasible as part, or economically feasible as part of economic recovery stimulus packages, but it's obviously also completely necessary for the future health of our societies. So I wanted to find out what the public thinks about this, so that activists such as myself can make use of this, and also so that politicians can be informed as to what the public actually thinks. And there are a number of reasons why the pandemic might impact on how people think about the economy. And for example, the pandemic is a situation in which experts have made warnings, and it has emphasized the importance of following the expert warnings. It's emphasized how it's possible to follow expert warnings to do rather drastic things that would not previously have been thought plausible. But, you know, most of us will come from countries where we've not exactly enthusiastically, but very willingly embraced lockdown as a means to save human beings, basically. But also, COVID-19 has massively damaged the economy in obvious ways. So how all these different aspects interact to generate public opinion is an interesting and somewhat unpredictable question. not only did I want to look at public opinion broadly, but I also wanted to look at how it's predicted by demographic and political factors. There are various ways in which we'd expect those variables to relate, but again, I think it's unpredictable exactly how that might play out in the current unprecedented context. So the background is that in the UK, where this research was conducted, concern about the environment amongst the public was record high. So at the end of 2019, the environment was ranked third amongst lists of concerns. That doesn't mean that most people had it third on their list, but it means that when YouGov have asked people to name spontaneously what they're worried about, it's been coming on average third. And I'm showing you with that graph in part because it can show, this graph also demonstrates the power of activism. Extinction Rebellion protests in London in April 2019 did an awful lot to raise the public's awareness and concern levels. But we obviously have something else to worry about right now. So towards the beginning of lockdown in the UK, I decided to sample to see how people were thinking in that context. I predicted that, in line with many previous studies, too many to list here, one would expect prioritization of the environment to be associated with greater education, higher socioeconomic status, and also not voting for the Conservative Party. Also, we should expect an interaction between education and political affiliation. We'll talk about that a bit more when we see the data. So the Extinction Rebellion, I was operating as a rebel at this point, commissioned a survey of a nationally representative sample from the UK back late April, early May. And this was balanced for a whole lot of things. It's kind of industry standards for national representative samples. There's a little bit of weighting involved to perfectly match the sample to national representative norms, but not a great deal. And these participants, it's very expensive to collect this kind of data, so you don't get much data, ideally, from each participant unless you want to pay an arm and a leg. So each participant read one speech and then answered 3 questions. It's a between subject design. Each condition begins with the same preamble. The point about these speeches is that they're supposed to be politically realistic speeches. So, and I consulted with politicians and news editors in order to check that they thought these were the kind of things they could imagine real politicians saying in the UK. So it begins with this preamble saying the things you'd expect politicians to say about COVID in general, and introducing the idea of the economy. And then there are 2 conditions. One emphasizes, and I'm quoting now, regarding COVID-19 and climate change, start quote, "There's 2 threats are different and each requires us to act differently. The pandemic has caused so much damage to our economy that we can't currently afford to focus on the environment. Only with a prosperous economy will we later be able to resume our focus on climate change." And quoting from the environmental prioritization condition, "COVID-19 is a wake-up call, but one that shows we can act. The environment must therefore be at the heart of our future economy as we rebuild a society prepared to tackle catastrophic climate change. Only if we also address this threat will a prosperous economy be sustainable." These speeches are balanced in quite a lot of ways. For example, number of mentions of keywords like COVID, economy, environment, etc. But you'll note that they do also vary in a number of different dimensions. So if we find effects, it's going to be difficult to put our finger on exactly what it is about the framing that has caused about the speech that has caused the difference in response. This is quite deliberate because I wanted 2 politically realistic speeches. We can do other breakdowns in future studies to try and find out in more detail what leads to the effects that we observe. The 3 questions that are answered are, what is the impact of COVID-19 on the economy? What is the impact of climate change? And what is the impact of based on the speech, how likely would you be to vote for this politician? Are the values displayed in the speech similar or different to your own? Do you agree or disagree that the arguments in the speech make good sense? We have a very high correlations between responses to these different items, so we're combining them into a single response variable between -3 and +3, so 0 is neutral. So here is a summary of the main results. Begin by looking at how the population as a whole is much more positive towards the environmental prioritization speech than they are towards the speech that points out that the environmental prioritization is currently unaffordable. I'd next like you to observe that the number of the percentage of people who are positive towards the environmental prioritization speech is the same, 62%, in the conservative voting subsample as it is in the sample as a whole. I found that to be rather remarkable. Based on previous work showing across different countries, including the UK, that consistently those who vote for right-wing parties are less likely to be concerned about the environment. By the way, the response variable here has been collapsed to 3 categories: negative, positive, or neutral. On the whole, a large minority of people are negative about the environment's unaffordable speech. A slightly smaller minority are positive about it. Now, we're going to look into these details, look into these results in a bit more detail now on following slides. Here's a statistical model of the responses. We're modeling the responses to the speech. You can note that there's a clear effect of condition. They do, as a whole, people respond more positively to the environmental prioritization speech. I'm only showing the results from interactions with speech because all the main effects are basically just telling us about how people use the response scale independently of which speech they are responding to. So that's not very interesting. You can see that Conservative vote, it does make a difference. So they are positive equally often, but they're not as positive when you use the full scale rather than collapsing into these categories. We don't see age effects. We don't see clear evidence of gender effects or social grade, socioeconomic status. The socioeconomic status is measured through social grades, which is a standard variable used by UK pollsters like YouGov, and it is mainly determined by occupation, by classification of occupation into low status or high status occupation types. But it apparently doesn't influence how their relative preference between the different speeches. I'll come back to that again in a minute. Education does make a difference, and we also have an interaction between voting and education. So we're just going to look at that now. So what you can see here is that interaction broken down. So you can see how people responded to the environment unaffordable speech in blue, the environment prioritized speech in green. So this is for 4 different subsamples based on whether they voted Conservative or not, and on whether they have or have not got some tertiary education, been to university or something like it. What you can see is that the difference in preference between speeches is relatively small in all the groups. It's there and it's statistically significant in all the groups, but it's not huge, except in the group who are educated and are more educated and who didn't vote Conservative. That interaction is as you would expect from previous data in the US. I don't actually know of any UK data that specifically looked at this interaction. If anyone knows of any UK data that looks directly at this interaction, I'd be very interested to hear. We're confident there's a small effect of social grade. So if you look at the top, highest and lowest grades, we've got 65% versus 59%. I'm running out of time now, so I'm just going to very quickly mention that that's not what we'd expect based on previous studies, as one mentioned here that I'm not going to go into detail of. It was very surprising to me, that result. These results, as a whole, no one else has broken down by demography and politics, as far as I know. But the broad picture that the public in general thinks this way is being replicated in some other opinion polls now. So, key conclusions. Experts and public both want a green recovery. Why doesn't the UK government? Don't have time to discuss that now. They say they do, but nothing they've done actually seems to indicate that. There's weaker effects of both socioeconomic status and political affiliation than expected. It's likely that Conservative voters themselves would also be surprised by this. That would accord with data from the United States, where it's been looked at what people think about other people in their own political groupings. They should be told. Why is there an absent socioeconomic status effect? Well, I note that socioeconomic status effects are weaker in countries where environmental threats are more immediate. So my theory is that the sense of immediacy of the climate crisis is increasing in people across the whole of society. And that could be because, one sort of science fiction, the threat that has been on the cards for a while, but people probably didn't think would actually happen, has now happened. That's my speculation. I'm interested to know what yours is. I'm interested to know anything that you want to say about this study. I'm not presenting this live, sadly, so you can't feed back to me immediately. But yeah, please get in touch. ben.kenward@gmail.com. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for listening.
And thanks very much to you, Ben, wherever you are traveling through Europe, potentially even in Germany. We were very lucky to be able to find a solution in your case, and hopefully in others in future conferences as part of the Bridges series, where we can find flexible solutions for those of us having to deal with childcare, for example, or travel. We're very, very glad that we could have an environmental perspective, and thank Ben for his contribution. I've popped his email contact details into the live chat on YouTube. You can also find them on our website, unibv.de/social bridges, and move on to the program and find Ben's details there, as well as an abstract of what he presented today, which I think we all agree is topical and important as policymakers decide how to move forward. A theme for this morning's sessions. Moving forward, the general theme of this conference has been during and post-COVID, and hopefully we are moving into a post phase in this pandemic. We've had people telling us a little bit about that this morning. We'll be hearing about, however, people who are still suffering with the effects and have a focus on mental health when we return this afternoon. However, before we finish, I'd like to just flag up a few things in case people listening are interested. We will be running, as part of our offering, some follow-up workshops on some specific cases themes that we've been covering over the last few days. These will most likely be half-day sessions that you can pre-register for, likely to be in the beginning of September. We're looking at the second week of September at this moment in time, giving people time to work on their data, but perhaps more importantly, especially after the last few months that have been so stressful for us all, and we'll be hearing about that stress in a couple hours' time, to take a break. However, let us come back and work hard on workshops with the following themes: cross cultures and within cultural effects, getting together, group alignment, this African drumming theme that we've been talking about, the positive and negative power of social media, how science can help policymakers, one on predictive models, looking specifically at how messages are communicated, how we internalize those messages, and how this shapes behavior. A workshop on research methods, which I think will be useful for us all as we deal with the kinds of data we've been looking at. And lastly, but very importantly, mental health and coping. The hope is that you may also have some ideas for some of these workshop themes. Please do send them along to me. We will then try and send out a list of these workshops to any and all who have registered for the current event, and see if anybody would like to join one of these workshops. And then the sessions will basically consist of three things. One is a quick catch up on any new data that people have to present that might be relevant to the theme. We will then also have pre-submitted topics of interest or questions that the workshop would likely try to answer. And then the output of these workshops will either perhaps be a state-of-the-art paper or a contribution for the special issue that we are arranging with Frontiers in Psychology. These are the follow-up workshops planned for the end of the summer, most likely in the first or second week of September. However, we'll be setting some doodle polls to get a sense of people's availability around those times. We're lucky at the Bridges e-conference series to not be bound by space or time. So we can have people joining us from around the world, even in a pre-recorded form, as we've just had with Ben Kenward telling us about why even conservative voters want to put the environment first. We're sorry we're not able to interact with you, Ben, but if anybody would like to, again, his email address is in the live chat. We're about to go on our lunch break, which is a little bit earlier than planned, but I'm sure nobody will mind that extra few minutes to grab a sandwich, grab a coffee, and get ready for our afternoon session, which, as I said, can be divided into two parts. The first part, as we come back, will be talks by Professor Ulrika Hahn and Professor Jay van Bavel, telling us about that link between science and policy. And then we'll have an important session on mental health with contributions both from Europe and America, the Americas, telling us about how the COVID pandemic has had an impact on mental health, but also perhaps how we can buffer ourselves through mindfulness. I look forward to welcoming our speakers in a few minutes and hours' time from around the world to this, our global conference, Social Bridges, on the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on society, psychology, and behavior. Thank you all for joining us, for our presenters this morning, for those who've been contributing to the chat, and to all of you watching. We look forward to welcoming you back soon. And for that, I will